This is Mr. B reads J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and we're going to start with the incredible work of The Fellowship of the Ring, arguably one of the best books ever written. This story series is aimed at our older children in years 4, 5 and 6, and we're going to enjoy listening with it to the incredible soundtrack from the films, the music of Howard Shore. So sit back and enjoy the wonderful work and music of Lord of the Rings. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. It was 3 years before Gandalf reappeared and paid Frodo a brief visit. He took a good look at him and then went off again. During the next year or two, he turned up fairly often, coming unexpectedly after dusk and going off without warning before sunrise. He would not discuss his own business and journeys, however, and seemed chiefly interested in small news about Frodo's health and doings. Then suddenly his visits ceased. Now it was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him, and he had begun to think that the wizard would never return and had given up all interest in hobbits. But that evening, as Sam his gardener was walking home and twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the study window. Frodo welcomed his old friend with surprise and great delight. They looked hard at one another. "All well, huh?" said Gandalf. "You look the same as ever, Frodo." "So do you," replied Frodo, but secretly he thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and of the wide world, and soon they were deep in talk, and they stayed up far into the night. The next morning, after a late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. A bright fire was on the hearth, but the sun was warm and the wind was in the south. Everything looked fresh, and the new green of spring was shimmering in the fields and on the tips of the trees' fingers. Gandalf was busy smoking in silence. Frodo was sitting still, deep in thought. Even in the light of the mornings he felt the dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought the night before. At last he broke the silence. "Last night you began to tell me strange things about my ring, Gandalf," he said. "And then you stopped, because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you had better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I can guess. In what way?" "In many ways," answered the wizard. "It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. So powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. Long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings as you call them, and they were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one of the great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until at last every minute is a weariness, and if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later, even if he is well-meaning to begin with, the dark power will devour him." "How terrifying," said Frodo. There was another long silence. The sound of Sam Gamgee cutting the lawn came in from the garden. "How long have you known this?" asked Frodo at length, "and how much did Bilbo know?" "Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I'm sure," said Gandalf. "He would certainly never have passed on to you anything that he thought would be a danger. Even though I promised to look after you, he thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful at need, and if anything was wrong or queer, it was himself. He said that it was growing in his mind, and he was always worrying about it, but he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame. Though he had found out that the thing needed looking after, it did not seem always of the same size or weight. It shrank or expanded in an odd way, and might suddenly slip off a finger where it had been tight a moment before." "Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter," said Frodo, "so I have always kept it on its chain." "Very wise," said Gandalf. "But as for his long life, Bilbo never connected it with his ring at all. He took all the credit for that himself, and he was very proud of it, though he was getting restless and uneasy. Thin and stretched, he said, a sign that the ring was getting control." "How long have you known all this?" asked Frodo again. "Known?" said Gandalf. "I have known much that only the wise know, Frodo, but if you mean known about this ring, I still do not know, one might say. There was one last test to make, but I no longer doubt my guess." "Now the time has come to test the ring," said Gandalf. "Give me the ring, please, Frodo, for a moment." Frodo took it from his breeches pocket, where it was clasped to a chain that hung from his belt. He unfastened it and handed it slowly to the wizard. It felt suddenly very heavy, as if either it or Frodo himself was in some way reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. Gandalf held it up. It looked to be made of pure and solid gold. "Can you see any markings on it?" he asked. "No," said Frodo, "there are none. It is quite plain, and it never shows a scratch or sign of wear." "Well then, look." To Frodo's astonishment and distress, the wizard threw it suddenly into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire. Frodo gave a cry and groped for the tongs, but Gandalf held him back. "Wait," he said in a commanding voice, giving Frodo a quick look from under his bristling brows. No apparent change came over the ring. After a while, Gandalf got up, closed the shutters outside the window, and drew the curtains. The room became dark and silent, though the clack of Sam's shears, now nearer to the windows, could still be heard faintly from the garden. For a moment the wizard stood looking at the fire, then he stooped and removed the ring to the hearth with the tongues, and at once picked it up. Frodo gasped. "It is quite cool," said Gandalf. "Take it." Frodo received it on his shrinking palm. It seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever. "Hold it up," said Gandalf, "and look closely." As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring, outside and inside, lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. "I cannot read the fiery letters," said Frodo, in a quavering voice. "No," said Gandalf, "but I can. The letters are elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here. But this is in the common tongue is what is said close enough. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them." This is the Master Ring, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. This is Sauron's great ring. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it. Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand, like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring," he stammered. How on earth did it come to me?" "Ah," said Gandalf, "that is a very long story. The beginnings lie back in the black years which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you about Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumours that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood and returned to his ancient fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again." "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening quick. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this dreadful chance. But the enemy still lacks one thing to give him strength and knowledge to beat down all resistance, break the last defences, and cover all the lands in the darkness. He lacks the one ring." The three, fairest of all, the elf lords, hid from him, and his hand never touched them or sullied them. 7 the dwarf kings possessed, but 3 of those he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to mortal men, proud and great, and so ensnared them. Long ago they fell under the dominion of the One, and they became ring-wraiths, shadows under his great shadow, his most terrible servants. That was long ago. It is many a year since the 9 walked abroad. Yet who knows, as the shadow grows once more, they too may walk again. But come, we will not speak of such things in the morning of the Shire. So it is now the 9 he has gathered to himself. The 7 also, or else they are destroyed. The 3 are hidden still, but that no longer troubles him. He only needs the 1, for he made the ring himself. It is his, and he let a great part of his former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, wherever they may be, even the 3, and all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and he will be stronger than ever. And this is the dreadful chance, Frodo. He believed that the One had perished, that the elves had destroyed it, as should have been done. But he knows now that it has not perished, that it has been found. So he is seeking it, and all his thought is bent on it. It is his great hope and our great fear. "But why wasn't it destroyed?" cried Frodo. "And how did the enemy ever come to lose it? If it was so strong, and it was so precious to him?" He clutched the ring in his hand, as if he already saw dark fingers stretching out to seize it. "It was taken from him," said Gandalf. "The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago, and not all men were estranged from them. The men of Westerness came to their aid. That is a chapter of ancient history which it might be good to recall, for there was sorrow then too, and gathering dark, but great valour and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day perhaps I will tell you all the tale, or you shall hear it told in full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, all you need to know is how this thing came to you, and that tale I will say. It was Gil-galad, Elven King, and Elendil of Westerness who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed, and Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished, and his spirit fled and was hidden for long years, until his shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost, it fell into the great river Anduin and vanished. For Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Gladden fields he was waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all his folk were slain. He leapt into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him and killed him with arrows. Gandalf paused, and there in the dark pools amid the Gladden fields, he said, the ring passed out of knowledge and legend, and even so much of its history is known only now to a few, and the Council of the Wise could discover no more. But at last, I think I know the next stage of the story. I think that is where it passed onto the hands of the creature Gollum. Gollum? Cried Frodo. Gollum? Do you mean that is the very Gollum creature that Bilbo met? How loathsome! But why can't we destroy the ring? Said Frodo. As you said, this should have been done long ago. If you had warned me, or even sent a message, I would have done away with it for you. Would you? And how would you have done that? Said Gandalf, even if you had tried. I suppose I could hammer it, or melt it. Try that, Gandalf said. Try it now. Frodo drew the ring out of his pocket again and looked at it. It now appeared plain and smooth, without mark or device that he could see. The gold looked very fair and pure, and Frodo thought how rich and beautiful was its colour, how perfect was its roundness. It was an admirable thing, and altogether precious. When he took it out, he had intended to fling it from him to the very hottest part of the fire, but he now found that he could not do so, not without a great struggle. He weighed the ring in his hand, hesitating, and forcing himself to remember all that Gandalf had told him, and then with an effort of will, he made a movement, as if to cast it away, but he found that he had put it back in his pocket. Gandalf laughed grimly. You see, already you too, Frodo, cannot easily let it go, or damage it, and I could not make you, except by force, which would break your mind. But as for breaking the ring, force is useless. Even if you took it and struck it with a heavy sledgehammer, it would make no dint in it. It cannot be unmade by your hands, or by mine. Your small fire, of course, would not melt even ordinary gold. This ring has already passed through it unscathed, and even unheated. But there is no smith's forge in the Shire that could change it at all. Not even the anvils and furnaces of the dwarves could do that. It has been said that dragon fire could melt and consume the rings of power, but there is not now any dragon left on earth in which the old fire is hot enough. There is only one way to destroy the ring, to find the cracks in the sides of Mount Doom, the fire mountain, and cast the ring in there. If you really wish to destroy it, to put it beyond the grasp of the enemy forever. I do really wish to destroy it, cried Frodo. Or, well, to have it destroyed. I am not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf. You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom at any rate. But you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wit as you have. But I have so little of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring? No, cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. With that power I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. His eyes flashed, and his face was lit as by fire within. Do not tempt me, Frodo, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe and unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. He went to the window and drew aside the curtains and the shutters. Sunlight streamed back again into the room. Sam passed along the path outside whistling. And now, said the wizard, turning back to Frodo, the decision lies with you. But I will help you. He laid his hand on Frodo's shoulder. I will help you bear this burden, as long as it is yours to bear. But we must do something soon. The enemy is moving. There was a long silence. Gandalf sat down again and puffed at his pipe, as if lost in thought. His eyes seemed closed, but under his lids he was watching Frodo intently. Frodo gazed fixedly at the red embers on the hearth until they filled all his vision, and he seemed to be looking down into the profound wells of fire. He was thinking of the fabled cracks of doom and the terror of the fiery mountain. Well, said Gandalf at last, what are you thinking about? Have you decided what to do? "No," answered Frodo, coming back to himself out of darkness, and finding to his surprise that it was not dark, and that out of the window he could see the sunlit garden. "Or perhaps yes. As far as I understand what you have said, I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it, at least for the present, whatever it may do to me." "Whatever it may do, it will be slow to evil, if you keep it with that purpose," said Gandalf. "I hope so," said Frodo, "but I hope that you may find some other better keeper soon. But in the meanwhile, it seems that I am a danger to all that live near me. I cannot keep the ring and stay here. I ought to leave Bag End, leave the Shire, leave everything and go away," he sighed. "I should like to save the Shire if I could, though there have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of going away, but I imagine that as a kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's, or better, ending in peace. But this would mean exile, a flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me, and I suppose I must go alone, if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small, and very uprooted, and well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible." "My dear Frodo," exclaimed Gandalf, "hobbits really are amazing creatures, as I have said before. You can learn all that there is to know about their ways in a month, and yet after 100 years they can still surprise you at a pinch. I hardly expected to get such an answer, not even from you, but Bilbo made no mistake in choosing his heir, though he little thought how important it would prove. I am afraid you are right. The ring will not be able to stay hidden in the Shire much longer, and for your own sake, as well as others, you have to go and leave the name of Baggins behind you as well. That name will not be safe to have outside the Shire, or in the wild. I will give you a travelling name now. When you go as Mr. Underhill. But I don't think you need to go alone, not if you know of anyone you can trust and who will be willing to go by your side, and that you would be willing to take into unknown perils. But if you look for a companion, be careful in choosing, and be careful of what you say, even to your closest friends. The enemy has many spies and many ways of hearing." Suddenly he stopped, as if listening. Frodo became aware that all was very quiet, inside and outside. Gandalf crept to one side of the window. Then with a dart he sprang to the sill and thrust a long arm out and downwards. There was a squawk, and up came Sam Gamgee's curly head, hauled by one ear. "Well, well, bless my heart," said Gandalf. "Sam Gamgee, isn't it? Now what may you be doing?" "Lord bless you, Mr. Gandalf, sir," said Sam. "Nothing, leastways I was just trimming the grass border under the window, if you follow me." He picked up his shears and exhibited them as evidence. "I don't," said Gandalf grimly. "It is some time since I last heard the sound of your shears. How long have you been eavesdropping?" "Eavesdropping, sir? I don't know, begging your pardon. There ain't no eaves at Bag End, and that's a fact." "Don't be a fool. What have you heard, and why did you listen?" Gandalf's eyes flashed, and his brows struck out like bristles. "Mr. Frodo, sir," cried Sam, quaking. "Don't let him hurt me, sir. Don't let him turn me into anything unnatural. My old dad would take on so. I meant no harm, on my honour, sir." "He won't hurt you," said Frodo, hardly able to keep from laughing, although he was himself startled and rather puzzled. "He knows as well as I do that you mean no harm. But just you up and answer his questions straight away." "Well, sir," said Sam, dithering a little, "I heard a deal that I didn't rightly understand about an enemy, and rings, and Mr. Bilbo, sir, and dragons, and a fiery mountain, and elves, sir. I listened because I couldn't help myself, if you know what I mean. Lord bless me, sir, but I do love tales of that sort, and I believe them too, whatever Ted may say. Elves, sir, I would dearly love to see them. Couldn't you take me to see elves, sir, when you go?" Suddenly Gandalf laughed. "Come inside," he shouted, and putting out both his arms, he lifted the astonished Sam, shears, grass clippings and all, right through the window, and stood him on the floor. "Take you to see elves, he said, eyeing Sam closely, but with a smile flickering on his face. "So you heard that Mr. Frodo is going away?" "I did, sir, and that's why I choked, which you heard seemingly. I tried not to, sir, but it burst out of me. I was so upset." "It can't be helped, Sam," said Frodo sadly. He had suddenly realised that flying from the Shire would mean more painful partings than merely saying farewell to the familiar comforts of Bag End. "I shall have to go, but," and here he looked hard at Sam, "if you really care about me, you will keep that dead secret, see? If you don't, if you even breathe a word of what you've heard here, then I hope Gandalf will turn you into a spotted toad and fill the garden full of grass snakes." Sam fell on his knees, trembling. "Get up, Sam," said Gandalf. "I have thought of something better than that. Something to shut your mouth and punish you properly for listening. You shall go away with Mr. Frodo." "Me, sir?" cried Sam, springing up like a dog invited for a walk. "Me? Go and see elves and all? Hooray!" he shouted, and then he burst into tears.